My grandfather's watch had been losing time for a year. At first it was a few seconds a day, a minor inconvenience, a ghost in the machine. I'd adjust it every morning, a small ritual of winding the crown and nudging the minute hand back into alignment with the world. But the ghost grew bolder. Soon it was losing a minute, then 5. It became a companion that was perpetually, apologetically late. The watch was a 1950s Omega, a constellation of gold and steel he'd received for 40 years of service at a paper mill. It was the only thing of his I owned. Its steady, rhythmic ticking had been the background music to my entire adult life, a mechanical heartbeat strapped to my wrist. It was a connection to a man I barely remembered, a link to a past that felt more substantial than my own quiet, orderly present. My life was a series of neat, predictable boxes: my small apartment, my cubicle at the municipal records office, my solitary walks in the evenings. The watch was the one piece of elegant, storied history in an existence built of beige drywall and spreadsheet cells. Then, one Tuesday morning, there was only silence. I picked it up from my nightstand and held it to my ear. Nothing. The second hand was frozen at the 7. The silence was immense, a profound and personal void. It felt less like a broken object and more like a death in the family. My own pulse seemed to thrum too loudly in the absence of its familiar beat. For 2 days, I wore it anyway, a dead weight on my wrist. A memorial. But the sight of its static hands was a constant, nagging reminder of failure. My failure to keep the one important thing going. On the 3rd day, I asked Margaret in archives, a woman whose knowledge of local lore was as vast and uncatalogued as the dusty boxes surrounding her. "A watch like that?" she'd said, peering over her glasses. "There's only one person. Julian. Out on the old mill road. He doesn't advertise. You have to know." She gave me a hand-drawn map on the back of a discarded request form. Finding the shop was an act of faith. It was a small, stone-fronted building set back from the road, half swallowed by overgrown ivy. A simple, unadorned wooden sign hung from a wrought iron bracket, reading simply, J. Du Bois, Horologist. The word itself sounded ancient, serious. I pushed open the heavy oak door and stepped out of my world and into his. The air inside was thick with the scent of oil, aged wood, and something metallic and clean, like brass polish. It smelled of patience, and from every surface, a sound. The gentle, syncopated ticking of 100 different clocks. Grandfather clocks stood like solemn sentinels along one wall, their pendulums swinging in slow, hypnotic arcs. Mantel clocks ticked in a chattering chorus from shelves, and the tiny, frantic heartbeats of pocket watches emanated from glass display cases. It was a symphony of managed time. And in the center of it all, bathed in the focused glow of a green-shaded banker's lamp, a man was bent over a workbench. He didn't look up. All I could see was the back of his dark head, the focused line of his shoulders in a simple gray t-shirt, and his hands. His hands were mesmerizing. They moved with an impossible delicacy, one holding a pair of fine-tipped tweezers, the other steadying a movement so small it seemed to be made of captured moonlight and spider silk. I stood there for a full minute, feeling like an intruder, a loud, clumsy animal in a sanctuary of precision. I cleared my throat. The man's head lifted slowly. He turned, and his eyes found me. They were a deep, startling blue, and his gaze was steady, unreadable. He looked to be in his late 30s, a few years older than me. His face was all quiet angles, with a shadow of stubble along his jaw. There was a stillness about him, a stark contrast to the constant motion of his trade. "Can I help you?" His voice was low, a soft gravel that seemed to vibrate in the ticking air. I felt my own voice catch. I held up my wrist. "My watch." I managed, the words sounding thin and inadequate. It stopped. He rose from his stool and walked toward me. He was taller than I'd expected, with a lean, wiry strength. He moved with the same unhurried grace as his hands. He didn't smile, but the intensity of his focus shifted from the tiny gears on his bench directly to me. It was a heavy, unnerving thing to be the subject of that attention. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to my wrist. I nodded, fumbling with the clasp of the leather strap. I handed it to him. He took it not like a piece of jewelry, but like a wounded bird. He cradled it in his palm, his thumb stroking the scratched crystal face with a tenderness that made my stomach clench. He turned it over and over, his blue eyes scanning every detail. A caliber .351, he murmured, more to the watch than to me. Bumper automatic. Good movement. He brought it to his ear, listening to the silence as I had. When did it stop? Tuesday morning. He nodded, his gaze distant, as if he were mentally disassembling the watch right there in his palm. It will need a full service. A cleaning, lubrication. I'll have to check the mainspring. It could be broken. He looked up at me, his expression serious. This isn't a quick fix. Parts for these can be difficult to source. It was my grandfather's, I said, the words rushing out, a plea for him to understand its worth beyond the mechanics. His eyes softened, just a fraction, a flicker of something that wasn't purely professional. I understand, he said, and I believed him. Leave it with me. I'll open it up and see what we're dealing with. I'll call you in a few days. He wrote my name and number on a small, tan tag with a fountain pen, his script a series of elegant, controlled loops. He tied the tag to the watch buckle and placed it carefully on a velvet-lined tray. Seeing it there, separated from me, felt like leaving a part of myself behind. I left the shop with a naked wrist and a strange sense of both loss and anticipation. The quiet ticking of my own world had been replaced by the memory of 100 clocks and the steady, unreadable gaze of their keeper. He called me 4 days later. Leo, his voice on the phone was the same low hum, sending a strange shiver down my spine. It's Julien Dubois. I've had a look at your grandfather's Omega. Is it bad? I asked, my knuckles white on the receiver. The mainspring is intact. That's the good news. But it's dry. Decades of old, gummy oil. The balance staff pivot is also worn. It needs to be replaced, he paused. It's a delicate job, and the part is obsolete. My heart sank. So you can't fix it? I didn't say that, he corrected, a hint of something, pride, perhaps, in his tone. I said the part is obsolete. It means I can't order it. It means I have to find it. Or, if it comes to it, make it. There was another pause. I'll need some time, he said. You're welcome to check in whenever you like. An invitation. That's what it felt like. Not a business transaction, but an open door. And so began my pilgrimage to the House of Time. My first return visit was a week later. I told myself it was a practical matter, a customer checking on a repair. But I knew it was a lie. I was drawn back to the quiet of the shop, to the scent of oil and wood, to the sight of him. He was at his bench again, a delicate loop attached to his glasses, making him look like some kind of arcane jeweler. He acknowledged me with a slight nod, not breaking his concentration. I stood by the counter, pretending to examine a row of carriage clocks, but my attention was fixed on him, on the way the muscles in his forearm tensed as he applied precise pressure with a tool, on the stray lock of dark hair that fell across his forehead, on the soft, rhythmic sound of his breathing, a human counterpoint to the mechanical chorus around us. I've been searching for the balance staff, he said, finally setting down his tool and removing the loop. He rubbed his eyes. There's a network of us. Collectors, old-timers. I've put out feelers, he looked at me, and I felt that familiar jolt of his full attention. It's like searching for a ghost. Thank you, I said, feeling foolishly grateful. For trying so hard. A corner of his mouth twitched, the barest hint of a smile. It's a beautiful watch. It deserves to run. That became our routine. I'd stop by the shop once, sometimes twice a week, under the guise of an update. The updates were usually minimal. Still looking, a possible lead in Germany. But it was the wrong caliber. I'm thinking about lathing a new one myself. The watch was the excuse, the necessary fiction that allowed me to stand in his quiet space and just watch him. I learned the landscape of his concentration. The way he'd bite his lower lip when a gear wouldn't seat properly. The soft curse he'd mutter under his breath when his tweezers slipped. The deep, satisfied sigh he'd let out when a movement was reassembled and began to beat on its own again. I was becoming a student of Julien Dubois. During one visit, he was working on a massive grandfather clock, its ornate hood removed and its brass guts exposed. He had his arm deep inside the casing. "Could you pass me that screwdriver?" he asked without looking, pointing with his chin to a red-handled tool on his bench. I picked it up and brought it to him. As I handed it over, my fingers brushed against his. His skin was warm, calloused, and a spark of static electricity, or something that felt like it, jumped between us. It was nothing. An accident. A meaningless, fleeting contact. but my heart hammered in my chest. I retreated to my usual spot by the counter, my hand tingling. I watched him, but now my analysis was frantic. Did he feel it? Did his hand hesitate for a fraction of a second? Was the slight flush on his neck from exertion or something else? I was a detective in a case with only one utterly unreliable witness, my own yearning. He never gave anything away. His focus was absolute. But the space between us had changed. It was charged now, filled with the hum of unspoken possibilities. The air was no longer just filled with ticking. It was filled with tension. Weeks turned into a month, then two. The watch sat in its disassembled state in a small, sectioned tray on his bench, its heart exposed and waiting. It became a permanent fixture, a silent testament to our strange, ongoing relationship. One rainy afternoon, I arrived to find the shop empty. A small, handwritten note was taped to the door. Back in 15 minutes. I stood under the meager shelter of the eaves, the rain dripping a dreary rhythm onto the pavement. The door was unlocked. I hesitated for only a second before pushing it open and stepping inside, feeling like a trespasser. The shop was different without him in it. The ticking of the clocks seemed louder, more insistent. I walked over to his workbench, my courage bolstered by his absence. There was my watch, its tiny, intricate components laid out like a patient in surgery. Next to it was a dog-eared book on escapement mechanisms. And next to that, a half-empty mug of coffee, still warm. I reached out and touched the ceramic, a jolt of illicit intimacy. This was his space, his life. The door opened behind me, and I jumped back, my face burning. Julian stood there, shaking the rain from a dark jacket. He looked at me, then at the workbench, then back at me. His expression was, as always, unreadable. "I'm sorry," I stammered. The door was open. The note said, "It's fine," he said, his voice calm. He hung his jacket on a peg by the door. "You're not going to steal any secrets." He walked over to the bench and stood beside me, closer than he ever had before. The scent of rain and damp earth clung to him. "This is it," he said, pointing with a long finger at the tiny tray. "Your grandfather." We stood in silence for a moment, shoulder to shoulder, looking down at the scattered pieces of my past. My arm brushed against his. This time it wasn't an accident. I didn't pull away. Neither did he. "I found a lead," he said, his voice a low murmur, very close to my ear. "A real one. A retired watchmaker in Vermont. He has a workshop full of old stock. He thinks he might have a new old stock staff that will fit." "New old stock?" I asked, my mind struggling to focus on the words, hyper-aware of the warmth of his body next to mine. An original part that was never used. The Holy Grail. He turned his head to look at me. His blue eyes were dark in the dim light of the shop. "The thing is, he's 87. He won't ship it. He wants to see who he's selling it to. He wants to talk shop." I held my breath. "So you have to go there?" "I do," Julian said. "It's a full day's drive." "This weekend," he paused, and the weight of that pause filled the entire room. The ticking of the clocks seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the sound of my own blood rushing in my ears. "I was thinking," he said slowly, "that since it's your watch, you might want to come with me." The question hung in the air between us. It wasn't about the watch. Not really. It was a test. A threshold. My carefully constructed world of solitude and observation was being invited to get in a car and drive towards something new. "Yes," I said, the word coming out with more force than I intended. "I'd like that." The corner of his mouth lifted into that ghost of a smile again, but this time it reached his eyes. "Good," he said. "I'll pick you up Saturday. 7-inch. That Saturday, I was waiting on my front step at 6:45, my hands shoved in my pockets, feeling like a teenager on a first date. Julian pulled up in an old, dark green pickup truck that looked as sturdy and reliable as he did. The engine rumbled with a low, satisfying growl. The first hour of the drive was filled with a comfortable, if slightly awkward, silence. The landscape of our small town gave way to rolling highways. Julian drove with a relaxed, one-handed competence, his focus on the road. I watched the scenery blur past, my mind racing. What were the rules for this? Were we two men on a business trip? Or something else? "So," Julian said, breaking the quiet. "Records office. What's that like?" I was startled by the personal question. "It's quiet," I said. "Organized. I file deeds, birth certificates, historical documents. Everything has a place." You like things having a place, he stated. It wasn't a question. I do, I admitted. There's a comfort in it, in knowing where everything belongs. I get that, he said, glancing at me. A clock is the same. A universe where every single piece has a purpose. If one is out of place, the whole thing ceases to work, he paused. Or it just starts losing time. The parallel was so direct, so pointed, it felt like he had reached into my chest and touched the very core of my anxiety. He saw me. He understood the metaphor of the failing watch without me ever having to explain it. Why clocks? I asked, turning the focus back to him. He was quiet for a long moment. My father, he said finally. He was a tinkerer. Not a professional, just curious. He loved taking things apart to see how they worked. Radios, engines, watches. He wasn't very good at putting them back together again. A sad smile touched his lips. When he died, he left behind a basement full of beautiful, broken things. I was 16. I decided I was going to fix them. I started with a simple kitchen clock. When I finally got it to tick again, that sound. It was like I'd brought something back to life. I never stopped. The story was simple, profound, and deeply vulnerable. He had shared a piece of his own history, the origin story of the quiet man in the ticking shop. The cab of the truck felt smaller, more intimate. The barrier between us was dissolving with every mile marker we passed. We found the old watchmaker's house down a winding dirt road in the Vermont hills. The man, Alistair, was exactly as I'd pictured, frail, with bright, clever eyes and hands gnarled with arthritis, but still possessing a strange grace. He led us into a workshop that was a chaotic wonderland of horological treasures. It was Julian's shop magnified by 50 years of obsession. Julian and Alistair immediately fell into a deep, technical conversation, a language I didn't understand but found beautiful to listen to. They spoke of escapements and jewels, of Breguet overcoils and Guillaume balances. I watched Julian, saw the passion light up his face as he talked with one of his own kind. He wasn't just a repairman. He was an artist, a historian, a keeper of a dying flame. After an hour of talk, Alistair finally produced a small, yellowed envelope from a massive wooden card catalog. He tipped its contents onto a piece of velvet, a tiny, impossibly delicate sliver of steel. There she is, Alistair said with reverence. Balance staff for a 351. Been in that drawer since 1968-inch. Julian picked it up with tweezers, his usual steady hands, and examined it under his portable loupe. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It transformed him. The quiet, stoic mask fell away, revealing a pure, unadulterated joy. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It's perfect, Julian breathed. Alistair, thank you. We paid the old man, who refused to take more than a token amount, and started the long drive home as the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and purple. The tiny, precious part was nestled in a small vial in the truck's glove compartment. A victory. You were happy back there, I said into the deepening twilight. He's one of the last, Julian said, his eyes on the road. A living library. To talk to someone who just gets it. It's rare. He glanced at me, his expression soft in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. Thank you for coming with me. I wouldn't have missed it, I said, and I meant it. We drove the rest of the way in a comfortable silence, the shared experience hanging warm and heavy between us. When he pulled up in front of my apartment, he killed the engine. The sudden quiet was profound. I'll start on it Monday, he said. It should be ready by the end of the week. The end of the week. The end of my excuse. The end of our project. A familiar panic began to creep in. Julian, I started, not knowing what I was going to say. He turned to face me, his arm resting on the back of the seat. Leo, he said, his voice that low, resonant hum that did strange things to my insides. The watch is almost fixed, but I was hoping you'd still find a reason to come back. There it was. Another offering. A direct challenge to my fear. He wasn't going to let our connection end with the final turn of a screw. I am looking at him, really looking. The faint lines around his eyes. The way the streetlight carves his jawline out of the darkness. My heart is a frantic, panicked bird in my chest. Say something. Do something. I will, I managed to say. I'll find a reason. His smile was small, but it was real. Good night, Leo. Good night, Julian. I didn't wait until the end of the week. I couldn't. I showed up on Wednesday, my heart a traitorous drum against my ribs. The bell on the door chimed, and he looked up from his bench. My watch, whole and gleaming, was ticking away in a testing clamp. "It's done," he said. He didn't smile. The atmosphere in the shop was different. It was charged, heavy. The pretense was gone. We both knew this wasn't about the watch anymore. He unclipped it from the tester and held it out. "It's been keeping perfect time for 48 hours. I took it from him, the familiar weight of it settling into my palm. The gold shone, the crystal was clear, and the second hand swept in a smooth, confident circle. It was alive again. "I don't know how to thank you," I said, my voice thick. "Let me," he said. "It needs to be fitted." He gestured for my wrist. I held out my left hand, my arm trembling slightly. He took my hand in his. His touch was warm and firm. It wasn't the fleeting, accidental brush of weeks past. This was deliberate, grounding. He looped the familiar leather strap around my wrist, his fingers working the buckle. He slid the pin into the hole, securing it. The job was done. My watch was back where it belonged. But he didn't let go. His fingers remained wrapped around my wrist. His thumb came up and rested on the inside, right over my pulse point. He held it there, his head bowed, his focus entirely on the frantic, galloping beat his touch had created. The ticking of 100 clocks faded away. The world narrowed to this single point of contact. The rough texture of his thumb against the thin skin of my wrist. The heat of his palm. He keeps my hand. My breath catches in my throat. This is it. The tipping point. The moment the world either snaps back into its old shape or breaks apart into a new one. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered his head. I watched, frozen, as he brought his lips to my wrist. He didn't kiss the skin. He kissed the pulse. A soft, warm pressure, an impossibly intimate acknowledgement of the life he could feel hammering just beneath the surface. It was a confession, a question, a statement. It was everything. My whole body shuddered. A sound escaped my lips, a soft, helpless sigh. He raised his head, his eyes finding mine. The unreadable blue was gone, replaced by a raw, open vulnerability. He was searching my face for an answer, for permission, for a sign that he hadn't just shattered everything. I gave it to him. I leaned forward, closing the small distance between us, and pressed my mouth to his. The kiss was not rushed. It was not desperate. It was honest. It was soft and searching, a discovery. It tasted of coffee and smelled of rain, and felt like coming home after a lifetime of being lost. His other hand came up to cup the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, holding me there. My free hand found his waist, clutching the fabric of his shirt as if he were the only solid thing in a spinning universe. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. We rested our foreheads together, the ticking of the clocks slowly seeping back into my awareness. But it sounded different now. It was no longer a measure of time passing, but of time beginning. "Leo," he breathed, his voice rough with emotion. "Julian," I whispered back. There was nothing else to say. A wave of panic, cold and sharp, suddenly washed over me. The kiss was over. The moment had passed. What now? What were the rules for this? My old anxieties came rushing back. This was his place of business. I was a customer. We had just crossed a line so profound I couldn't even see the other side. My instinct was to pull away, to stammer an apology, to run back to the safety of my beige, predictable life. I took a half step back, my hand dropping from his waist. The space between us felt like a chasm. His expression clouded over with uncertainty. No, not this time. Before I could retreat any further, Julian's hand tightened on my wrist, the one with the watch. He didn't let go. His other hand found mine, his fingers lacing through my own, a firm, possessive grip that anchored me to the spot. "Don't," he said, his voice low and steady. "Don't go." He looked directly into my eyes, and his gaze held me captive. "I've wanted to do that," he said, his voice quiet but clear, "since the first day you walked in here looking so lost." The reassurance was so simple, so direct, it cut through my panic like a laser. He wasn't regretting it. He wasn't awkward. He was sure. He was the steady hand, the confident movement, the man who knew how to put the broken pieces back together. "The watch is fixed," he said, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. "The job is over." He gave a small, wry smile. "But I meant what I said. I was hoping you'd still find a reason to come back." This was the choice. The conscious choice. I could take my watch, thank him for the reassurance, and walk out that door, leaving this moment as a beautiful, singular memory. Or I could stay. I could step into the unknown, into a life that wasn't neatly boxed and labeled. I looked down at our joined hands, then at my wrist, where my grandfather's watch was ticking with a strong, steady beat. It was no longer a symbol of my stagnation or a link to a dead past. It was a new rhythm. Our rhythm. I squeezed his hand. I think, I said, my voice finally finding its strength. I'm out of reasons to come to the shop. I saw a flicker of disappointment in his eyes before I continued. But I was hoping you might be free for dinner. Or coffee. Or just not being here. The relief that washed over his face was profound. The beautiful, genuine smile I'd seen in Vermont returned, and this time, it was all for me. I am, he said. I am very free. He glanced around the ticking, humming shop. Let me just close up. He released my hand, and for a terrifying second I felt adrift. But then he turned, flipped the sign on the door from open to closed, and locked it from the inside. He turned back to me, the jangling of the keys the only sound besides the clocks. There's an apartment upstairs, he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice now. We could start with coffee. I'd like that, I said, my own smile feeling wide and unfamiliar on my face. He led me through a door at the back of the shop and up a narrow, winding staircase. His apartment was the opposite of the meticulous shop below. It was comfortable, lived in, a little messy. Books were piled on every surface. A guitar leaned against a wall, and a half-finished painting of a forest landscape sat on an easel by the window. It was the space of the man, not the horologist. He made coffee while I wandered, looking at the titles of his books, the photos on his mantelpiece. I felt a profound sense of peace. The anxiety was gone, replaced by a quiet, thrilling curiosity. He handed me a mug, his fingers brushing mine. This time, the touch was easy, familiar. We stood by the large window, overlooking the rain-slicked street, the gray evening light filtering in. I looked from his face down to my wrist. The omega gleamed in the dim light, its second hand sweeping, sweeping. A constant, perfect rhythm. For so long, I had felt out of sync with the world, my own life losing time, falling behind. I'd been living in the past, tethered to a memory. Now, standing here with Julian, the scent of coffee and rain in the air, the warmth of the mug in my hands, I felt the steady beat of the watch not as a connection to what was lost, but as the pulse of a new beginning. I was no longer an observer of my own life. I felt the warmth of Julian's shoulder beside mine. The quiet hum of his presence was more comforting than any silence I had ever known. I hadn't just gotten my watch back. I'd been reset. I'd found my time. It felt like I'd come home.